I hate long introductions from content creators I'm watching for the first time, so I'm going to do my best to just jump right into this. Hi, I'm Sonia Tranitron. I'm a drag queen who has spent a long time intently studying The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. This is not because I think it's the best game of all time, or because it's one of my favorite games. It's because, despite the fact that I enjoy this game, I often found myself struggling to articulate why I enjoy it in a way that I find critically coherent. I'm going to assume that if you're watching this video, you have some basic familiarity with this game and the cultural conversation surrounding it. I'm going to assume, for example, that you know that you play as Link, and that Zelda is the name of the princess that you rescue. I'm going to assume you know a thing or two about overworlds and dungeons, and about how people generally struggle with the dungeons that have a lot of water in them. I'm going to assume that you know that this game is critically acclaimed, and is frequently declared to be the best game ever made. I'm going to even assume you know that there are a fair few people who reject the hype and think that this is the game where the Legend of Zelda series started to lose its way. With all those assumptions out of the way, then, I want to talk about my mindset as a critic and how I feel about Ocarina of Time. First of all, I really am not interested in discussing games in terms of progress and obsolescence. Was Ocarina of Time a better game when it released in 1998, 25 years ago? There are two possible responses to this. One is to say that it's the same game that it's always been, that Ocarina of Time is an artifact made of a static collection of ones and zeros. The other response is to say that Ocarina of Time is a complex, ever-changing collection of experiences we remember from various points in time. So Ocarina of Time is either completely unaffected by the 25 years since its release, or it is affected by so many factors that are so specific to every individual person experiencing it that it doesn't make sense to act as if it works according to the rules of produce with an expiration date. When this game released in 1998, I was a baby and wasn't really equipped to play it. By the time I had enough hand-eye coordination to handle a controller, my experience with Ocarina of Time was compromised by my inability to read. By the time I was able to read, I was more interested in Majora's Mask. By the time I finally played Ocarina of Time from start to finish, I was a teenager interested in video game criticism and was doing my best to play it with a critical eye. And now, most recently, as I played through the game for the purpose of writing about it, I found my appreciation for it increase the more exhaustively I examined it. My experience with this game, then, is hardly a linear progression of wide-eyed wonderment to jaded dismissal. And while I would imagine that I don't represent the so-called average gamer, I would imagine that the average gamer's experience with the games they play are similarly complex. But what about all the other games? What about all the games that came after Ocarina of Time and were objective improvements over it? What is there to appreciate about Ocarina of Time when we have Dark Souls, the only good game ever made? Sure, by the standards of its time, Ocarina of Time was pretty cool, but we have so many other options now. Is this really how anyone thinks, though? Is this how anyone experiences art? What does it mean to play Ocarina of Time and judge it by more modern standards? Is it even possible to play a 25-year-old game without even subconsciously adjusting your expectations to account for its age? Sound off in the comments if you can come up with a way of making that happen, but I'm not holding my breath. Every work of art is infinitely complex and has infinitely many ways of being understood. There are more nuanced ways of understanding games than as arrangements of the holy trinity of measurable video game qualities, gameplay, graphics, and story. If that's how you think about games, then it's impossible to conceive of why I would prefer the original version of Ocarina of Time to the remake it received for the 3DS, which has, according to a certain perspective, objectively better gameplay and graphics. Look, trust me when I say that if you free yourself from the burden of trying to make objective determinations about art, you'll immediately become better at understanding it. This isn't the same thing as just accepting everything everyone says under the auspices of subjectivity. It's more about keeping an open mind, not just for the purpose of understanding art, but also for the purpose of understanding the people who make art and the people who experience it. I'm able to appreciate Ocarina of Time then on some baseline level because it's a window into what game design and the culture of gaming looked like in 1998. Would this mean that I could appreciate anything as long as I could look at it as some kind of historical artifact? Well, it's an aspiration. I can't help but have my own emotional reactions as well, though. A game like Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, which is similar to Ocarina of Time in a lot of ways, interests me quite a bit, but I've struggled mightily to deal with the tedium and frustration of actually playing it. That baseline interest only gets me so far. What that leaves me with, then, is the fact that I do enjoy Ocarina of Time beyond that level. I enjoy actually playing it. Why is this? There is, of course, my familiarity and comfort with it. Sure, I had finished almost every other game in the Legend of Zelda series before I finished Ocarina of Time, but I was, by that point, intimately familiar with the general workings of Legend of Zelda games. The later dungeons of Ocarina of Time hardly felt like a dive into the unknown. Familiarity is a reflection of the player, though, not the game. It's obviously absurd to say that Ocarina of Time is interesting because I find it familiar and comfortable. What does that mean to anyone else? Instead, I could say that Ocarina of Time is a game that continually rewards familiarity in a satisfying way. This game derives its challenge not from intense combat or complex puzzles, but from the way it obscures the path forward. This game has a surprising depth, but this depth isn't experienced the same way that it is in a game driven by intricate dynamics of risk and reward. Finding out that the stray demon in Dark Souls is weak to the bleed status effect is strategically useful. Finding out that you can deflect Ganondorf's magical attacks with an empty bottle is theoretically a similar kind of revelation, but it lacks any particular utility. It's just a fun little detail that's interesting in a different kind of way. Ocarina of Time is a game filled to the brim with fun little details like that. I was putting the finishing touches on a larger piece of writing about this game, the culmination of months upon months of research and writing, before I realized that Bongo Bongo, the boss of the Shadow Temple, has a completely unique reaction to being shot with an ice arrow, even though it's rather unlikely that the player will have obtained that item by that point in the game. This revelation delighted me in a way that I can't imagine a game like Dark Souls doing, and it's not because I think Dark Souls is inferior, nor is it because I'm grading Ocarina of Time on a curve. It's just because, despite whatever similarities these two games have, I engage with them in fundamentally different ways. I like that Ocarina of Time is generally easy and simple. It shifts the focus away from simply surviving the game onto appreciating its artistry and craftsmanship at a more lackadaisical pace. Would this mean I would appreciate watching the game just as much as playing it? Not entirely, although watching a game is a perfectly valid way to experience it. But I do think there's something to be said for the experience of holding the controller in your hand. I think there's something to be said for the experience of gaining familiarity with Link and his unique way of moving through the world, his unique way of solving problems. Is it difficult to get through the various dungeons in this game? For the most part, no. But each of the dungeons is a unique emotional experience, and I think that goes a long way on its own. Even if it's simple to get from the beginning of one to the end, that doesn't have to be the end of your relationship with the dungeon. You could just as well spend some time looking back over it, appreciating the way that different rooms connect to each other. And none of that is to say that this game presents no opportunities to express skill. There's a substantial difference between how an inexperienced Legend of Zelda player goes through a dungeon and how a seasoned veteran does. The Water Temple is an infamous sore spot in this game, the most complex of its dungeons by a long shot. I've only just recently gotten comfortable going through it, even with all the time I've spent with this game. And it's not because I have it completely memorized, but because my growing understanding of its mechanics has finally allowed me to deal with its convolutions head on. Even for a comparatively simple dungeon like the Fire Temple, I'm able to run through it at a brisk, confident pace because, again, even without fully memorizing it, I understand it. That sense of understanding is, according to my own critical framework, one of the fundamental aspects of art appreciation. I think Ocarina of Time does a good job fostering this understanding and rewarding it. The question then is, why spend your time trying to understand Ocarina of Time as opposed to anything else? And that's a question I can't really answer. The truth is that, as a wildly successful game in a wildly successful series made by a wildly successful company, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time hardly needs to be built up any more than it already has been. I've actually committed to spending a few months diving into indie games as a form of repentance for devoting so much time to writing about Ocarina of Time. This video you're watching right now is, in fact, just a brief companion piece to a much larger piece where I talk about Ocarina of Time in about as much depth as I could physically handle. But it's also an amount of depth that I felt was almost necessary, because what I've discovered is that Ocarina of Time is a deceptively difficult game to talk about critically. As I've said, it's not a game driven by intricate dynamics of risk and reward. With a game like Dark Souls, I could, for example, talk about the tension of traveling far away from a bonfire, about the pressure of dodging a rapid succession of attacks, about the glorious high of parrying a big guy's attack. I can talk about Dark Souls in generalities. Ocarina of Time is a game that is all about its particulars. Sometimes it's an action game, sometimes sometimes it's a puzzle game, sometimes it's a game about hunting down hidden things, sometimes it's a game where the path forward might as well be marked with neon signs. Usually it's existing in a middle ground between a bunch of different things. Everyone's experience with it is unique, and I would never want to imply that any individual critic is insincerely following the hype train, but Ocarina of Time's critical acclaim, the way it tops lists of best games ever made, is less a reflection of its own excellence and more a reflection of how it affirms certain values of the game industry. Compare it to two other games released in 1998, both of which also had a lot of money poured into them, both of which are also critically acclaimed, both of which are also part of a larger game franchise. Resident Evil 2 and Metal Gear Solid are games that, depending on my mood, I would call either more compelling than or equally compelling as Ocarina of Time, but neither of them tops lists in quite the way Ocarina of Time does. There could be a lot of different reasons for this. Both of these games are heavier and darker than Ocarina of Time. Both of them are shorter than Ocarina of Time. Both of them have a narrower scope than Ocarina of Time. I would even argue that both of them have a stronger artistic vision than Ocarina of Time, depending on if I was in the mood to make that kind of nebulous comparison. Ocarina of Time mechanically occupies a middle ground. It gestures in the direction of a few different types of games, so it's easy to act like it's all of those things at once. Aesthetically, it's all rolling green fields and blue lakes, with brown mountains filled with red lava, where the friendly castle is white and blue, and the evil castle is black and red. There are helpless princesses, handsome heroes, and racially othered villains. I could keep going, but my point is this. Ocarina of Time could be considered a very normal game. Milquetoast. Bland. I wouldn't argue with that on its face. Do I like the game because this normalcy is comfortable to me? To some extent, sure. But what sustained my interest in this game, to the point where I felt compelled to write over 90,000 words about it, is the way that the passage of time reveals the strangeness that had always been lurking under the surface. And if I had to make my case for why this game isn't obsolete, beyond my general ethos that there is no such thing as an obsolete work of art, if I had to make a case about what should pique your interest in Ocarina of Time, so many years after its commercials stopped playing on TV, that would be it. This game has so many stones for you to turn over, with so many weird little bugs skittering underneath. Okay, bye. Thanks for watching.